Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second meeting in May. And at this point, could everyone please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, please take a seat. I hope everyone had a wonderful long weekend, celebrating with family, spending time with family. Okay, and then for today's meeting, we do have a business item, and that is the authorization for insurance policies. Can I have a motion, please? Ms. Levitin, second by Mr. Greco. Are there any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so up next, we are going to have a presentation on the implementation of the Anti-Bias Task Force. Okay.
So thank you. I'll spend a couple of minutes introducing this, and then I'll introduce the folks who are going to do the presentation. So the board charged us with developing a task force to work on recommendations for reducing instances of bias in the school district. The task force met over the course of the spring, prepared recommendations which were shared with you at the April board meeting. What we've been doing is operationalizing those recommendations. We have some of the words are on this slide, but a lot of it is going to be in the conversation that we share with you. We formed an internal working group that consisted of myself, Mr. Kuranishi, who is our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources and a member of the task force, one of the staff to the task force on my behalf, Mr. Steinberg, who is an assistant principal at the high school, but was the Principals Association representative to the task force, and Taisha Kelber-Foster, who is a psychologist and was this Syosset Teachers Association representative to the task force. So because we are task force members and also staff in the district, we formed a working group to go through each of the recommendations that were made by the task force and operationalize them and share with the board some context around how all of those implementations would work. So what we thought would be helpful and what we did for the task force was we prepared a briefing paper for them to illustrate the efforts that are already underway in Syosset. Certainly we've not been inattentive to the diversity in the school district, and we've been proud historically of our efforts to try and be a welcoming and inclusive environment for all of the folks who live in our community. So it was helpful, I think, so that the task force, who might not be as familiar with the efforts that the district has made, to not cover old ground, but instead cover new ground. And so what we'll do is contrast some of the work that's already occurred in the district with some of the recommendations that were made by the task force, and then how we would recommend to operationalize them. What I anticipate coming out of this conversation is us formalizing more of these plans, putting together internal work groups around each of the elements of the plans, and then having reports back to the board at periodic intervals on how the implementation is going. So with that, I'm going to introduce Mr. Kuranishi to get us started with the task force and the plan.
Good evening. I'm glad that everyone can hear me now. So our objective today is to discuss how we intend to implement the recommendations from the Anti-Bias Task Force. We divided our work for our implementation plan across 5 subgroups, and we're going to go in depth on each of those subgroups. So we have student experience, code of conduct and DASA, curriculum, recruitment and hiring and professional development, and lastly, community partnership.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Thank you to the board for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation with you. We decided to start with student experience because at the end of the day, that's why we are all here, is to make sure our students are having the best possible experience that they can have over the course of their time here in Syosset, and that we prepare them the best we can when they head off into their post-secondary plans. So when we look at that from the lens of belonging and inclusivity, and we look at what we're currently doing to make sure our students feel that way, we've always operated from a stance that there's something for everybody here in Syosset. That when you come into each one of our buildings, that there will be something that you can connect with, you can connect to, that make you and see yourself in what's happening. And so currently you will see throughout our buildings, especially at the high school, we have over 75 groups and clubs, and I'll tell you that's grown tremendously over the years. Those are student-led. Those are clubs, as you know. Students come into offices, say, hey, I have a great idea, and this is what I'd like to see happen. And the answer is always, yes, that can happen. Let's see how we do it. Over the past 15 years or so, we've increased the number of affinity groups we have. We started with a single affinity group, and as students came in and said, well, I'd like to start a Muslim Student Association, I'd like to start a Jewish Student Union, the answer was yes, let's do that. Let's make sure that students have that. We've always been mindful, though, to make sure that as we have these affinity groups, that they don't become disparate groups, that they are groups that help students to feel welcome, so they have groups that feel familiar to them, but at the same time, we look for opportunities to make sure that we are combining those groups through different activities and events that happen, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this presentation. It's really important that through the student experience that they feel a sense of agency and ownership in their education. We see that through our inquiry-based and our project-based learning approaches, where students are able to choose how they want to represent to their teachers and to us how they know things. They're the ones that can choose that. They make a choice. They choose the project they want to do that's involved in the work that's happening. So that's very important, so that, again, they can feel as if they're the ones with the agency, they're the ones with the ownership. We look to our students to provide voice into the curriculum, into the development, implementation of the curriculum. We have a student government curriculum committee at the high school that meets on a regular basis. And the students discuss what they're seeing in their curriculum, and they look to make recommendations to the administration about what kind of changes, and the word they use are nudges, in the curriculum that help them to feel as if the curriculum is more representative. We have the Advisory Leaders Club, peer educators throughout the secondary schools. They're creating lessons on advisory. They're delivering those lessons. They're creating lessons for No Place for Hate. They're all part of that. Most recently at the high school, we had our book day. At our book day, there's a student committee, along with teachers, that read and select the 9th grade reader, where all 9th grade students are reading those textbooks, and the students work alongside the teachers to create the question prompts that follow in follow-up discussions. And again, later on, I'll talk a little bit more about those things as well. And then we look at the building-wide events and school events like Junior Day that brings students together, where students can actually connect in small groups. They call them families during the day, where they can share with one another what their lived experience is. And they do that in a safe, supportive environment where they're able to connect. And when you speak to students about a day like that, they'll tell you that's one of the favorite days in school for them, is when they're able to connect in an event like that. But then we run community events like the Homecoming Carnival, the pep rally, that brings everyone together just to have a good time. And then, of course, if you're throughout the district, you know that there are multicultural events happening all throughout the district, in all buildings, all the time, in partnership with our PTA and our community that are student-run and student-led. And then we're fortunate that when we have the opportunity to run sort of these unique programs like we did recently, when we had the Carnegie Mellon professor Po-Shen join us, and give us a talk on what he calls future-proofing our students. And the talk basically focuses on how do we cultivate the human traits and human attributes in the face of AI. And it really brings in sort of a challenge and a broadening of our students' thoughts and what they're doing. So that gives you a kind of, overview of where the student experience lies, in and throughout the district. So going forward in terms of how we implement and how we're going to build upon what we do and how we're going to be better at what we do, well, we do a really good job of making students feel welcome. You walk into the classrooms, the teachers spend a lot of time and energy in making sure that their lessons are places where students can feel comfortable. We would look in the future, though, at additional opportunities to collect some additional data on what the lived experience is for our students. As much as we talk with our students, we connect with our students, we know there's more that we can learn from them. And so we're looking potentially in the future to do some focus groups, maybe some town hall events, where we give students more opportunities in addition to what we're currently doing, whether that's student cabinets at building levels or student cabinets at the district level, but we're looking to build upon those things. When we also want students to connect further through the curriculum, we want to increase the opportunity for conversations within the curriculum so that we can begin to, again, continue to foster and bolster that sense of belonging and that sense of community. And again, we'll see that throughout the schools in the form of an advisory. You will see students that are sitting in circles, talking with one another, sharing each other's experiences, whether they're personal experience or their school experiences. In the past year, we had a group form called the Syosset Unite. Syosset Unite now is at the high school, and now there are talks about that group forming at the middle schools as well. And this is a group that, when I spoke earlier about affinity groups, this is where the affinity groups come together. This is the kind of group where they come together, and right now the Unite group is talking about creating things like a cultural center at the high school. So they're beginning to start to be productive and start to bring the groups together where the students can now bring their voice together, and through the support of administration and teachers, they begin to see their work come to fruition. We have other avenues where we're looking to bolster. Our health curriculum is a really strong area where these skills are being taught, where we're looking at a lot of these skills, and we'll talk a little bit more when we get to curriculum later in the presentation about that opportunity in the health curriculum, about how we might be able to look at that in a different way, and the idea of curriculum mapping, this idea of evaluating our curriculum with a critical lens, again, looking for those opportunities where we can be teaching these skills and students can be practicing and learning these skills, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then, of course, all of this has to be done intentionally with professional development for our faculty and for our staff, so they understand, how to continue to foster these sort of environments, these welcoming, affirming environments for our kids as they're coming into the schools. So that's where we are in the student experience. I will now pass it along for our code of conduct conversation, and I think I'm going to give this back to Mr. Kanishi. No? Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Taisha Kelber-Foster. I'm a school psychologist here at Southwoods Middle School, and I'm so thankful to be participating in this great work that we're all doing with regard to anti-bias. So when it comes to our code of conduct, the complete code of conduct is something that is already available on the district website, as well as parent-friendly and student-friendly versions. Many of our parents aren't really privy to how we utilize the code of conduct as part of our restorative practices. So what that tends to look like sometimes is students are reminded both proactively as well as reactively. And what that might look like is our proactive quarterly reminders for students, grade level assemblies for students regarding what community expectations are, as well as some group level. So if there is a specific instance where there is some harm to our school community, those particular students would be identified, and then they would also be spoken to, as well as individualized rehearsals of the code. So for example, sometimes what happens is either one of the mental health professionals or the building level administrator will meet with the students and talk about the code specifically. What areas were violated? So for example, it could be, well, you violated the student responsibility of maintaining a safe, inclusive, harassment-free, violence-free environment. However, you also were able to demonstrate that, you know what, you were truthful when we sat down and we spoke with you, which is also a student responsibility. So we don't only highlight where there is a weakness or an area of growth, but we're also highlighting where they took responsibility. In addition to all of that, building level administrators send email reminders to parents because the collaboration between home and school is so important, so that it is reinforced at home what those student expectations are. And through our restorative practice model, we use the code of conduct to effectively remind students of community expectations, and as a result, we're able to uphold our motto of pride, so patience, respect, integrity, dignity, and empathy. It's our belief that there is value in repetition, and that's how we support our students in making the code of conduct a part of their repertoire.
Before I go on to the Dignity Act, I do want to say that Ms. Colbert Foster's work and presentation on and involvement and what she had just shared with you also speaks to the role of school psychologists, social workers, and many of the members of the PPS team, and to Ms. Goldthwaite's leadership and their involvement in code of conduct, restorative practices, and their collaboration with administrators, which is so essential to the work in our buildings. So DASA is designed to ensure that students can learn in an environment, in a space that's free of harassment and discrimination. And part of the work that we've done is to ensure that our reporting tools are accessible on the district website, to provide our training to our DASA coordinators throughout the buildings, and also to ensure that the coordinator role is more visible to students so they know how to file a report, who to go to, and who are the resources within our buildings. For our implementation goals, and as Ms. Colbert Foster had mentioned, the code serves as an important function in our schools to ensure that students feel safe and feel that they belong. And the document is, and we've discussed this, is 54 pages. So the task force, when we got together, engaged in an inquiry. And that inquiry was reflecting on some questions. Is the code clear in outlining the rights, responsibilities, and expectations as a member of the school community? Is the code user-friendly? Can we make it a more effective learning tool? So some of the enhancements that the task force came up with were creating a more user-friendly code of conduct to ensure that we're translating our documents into additional languages, developing a more accessible grade-appropriate, age-appropriate, abridged student handbook, create frequently asked questions with our common questions that emerge from the code of conduct, and also provide more educational opportunities for our families on how the conduct works and functions in our schools. Additionally, we hope to provide and continue to provide additional training for our DASA coordinators, our staff, our administrators, and also ensure that the DASA reporting tools are accessible. And most importantly, and this hopefully emerges as a common theme throughout our presentation, is that we can continue to foster a culture where students feel comfortable and safe to report incidents.
So there is a lot of talk about what cell phone usage should look like in schools. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the research tells us when it comes to cell phone misuse, overuse, and abuse. And basically what we've learned from neuroscience is that overusage, just use in and of itself, and abuse of social media, active scrolling, using devices, trolling the internet, video gaming, all have a significant impact on our frontal lobe, so our prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for expressive language, executive functioning, reasoning, working memory, all of the things that our students need in order to be successful academically. And what we know about cell phone overuse, misuse, and abuse is that it negatively impacts social interactions. It also reshapes behaviors. So children develop new behavioral scripts based off of this new social media culture. It changes social norms and expectations. So if we think about how our children and how individuals as a whole interact over social media, how they text one another, how they communicate one another, the face-to-face interactions are becoming null and void. So students don't know, individuals don't know, well, what questions are okay to ask? What's okay to say? What's okay to share? What's not okay to share? And despite our best efforts to support children in terms of understanding good, healthy social media usage, we are bombarded with a lot of misinformation. We are bombarded with a lot of technology. And technology is constantly changing, and it's moving very, very quickly. And with that in mind, that impacts the way that our children are interacting with one another. It's impacting their decision-making skills. It's impacting their impulse control, their self-control, their self-monitoring, all of those different things. So one of the ways that we feel it's important to work on this area without taking away our children's freedoms and our own is looking at some of our cell phone policies. So at the elementary level, students are encouraged not to have their cell phones on their person. They should be remaining in their backpacks. That way they can focus on what's happening in the classroom, and they're also interacting appropriately with their peers and their teachers. At the secondary level, it's an off and away during the day policy, but students are allowed to use their cell phones during lunch and recess. At the secondary level as well, some teachers in the classrooms have caddies where they instruct for their students to either take their smartwatch or their cell phones, place them at the front of the classroom, so that way it's not a disruption. Our students have devices already. They all have Chromebooks, right? They're already looking at a device throughout the day. They don't need an additional device for them to be trolling, scrolling, sending messages, taking pictures, things of that nature, which end up creating a problem when it comes to following the code of conduct, right? So if they're not listening and their teachers are asking them, hey, put your cell phone away, and they're arguing, or they're trying to hide it, then that becomes insubordination, right? Or they're misusing their cell phones when they could be doing something else. If we're looking at our state, our governor is considering supporting the Safe for Kids Act, which is a Stop Addictive Feeds exploitation. It seeks to restrict a young person's access to addictive social media feeds. And the research does show that children and individuals who are constantly using social media, video gaming, their behavioral profiles start to mimic the behavioral profiles of other behavioral addictions. So if we think at other things that we can be addicted to, children and individuals can also be addicted to gaming and to the internet, which overall impacts their neurobiology.
Okay, so that kind of shifts us to curriculum, which in light of the cell phone conversation, we'll talk a little bit about the SEL curriculum in a little bit, which is one way in which we're going to help the kids, continue to help them to understand how to use these things. But when we're looking at existing practices and how the curriculum provides that inclusive, that place where students feel like they belong, that they could interact with the curriculum, there's a lot that's going on. Mr. Konishi was talking about our social workers, and they play a key component in our elementary SEL lessons. They often push into the classrooms. They'll launch these lessons in the elementary school, so they'll help set it up, and they'll help those classroom teachers with that, which is fantastic. Also in the elementary, there'll be grade level restorative conversations, so students are starting to practice those skills of how to have those conversations. That No Place for Hate programs are present throughout our elementaries. And then most recently, over the years, we've basically lifted the TC library into all the elementary schools, not just into their libraries, but also to the classroom libraries. We provided a diversification of the text throughout. Really important, especially in the classroom, as students are given that time to go choose a text, and they're looking at these texts, and they get to pull a text and be able to see themselves. And they can see themselves in that, and immediately in that moment, they're going to feel as if they belong. And on the back end of that, not only were the libraries lifted in to diversify the offerings, but then the PD, the professional development that followed that. So in the K through 2 development, as you can see, was the embedding culture responsive mentor text in our classroom. So now we're helping teachers, empowering teachers, and how to actually now adjust the lessons, adjust the learning, so that the students can be using these and maximizing the use of this. And again, the 3 through 5 learning was using the literature to introduce tolerance, which was a more developmentally appropriate topic at that point. And so that through line now follows into our secondary schools, where we also have the advisory work that's happening in various ways in the secondaries. In our middle schools, we have advisory pullouts. In the high school, it's embedded into our wellness program. And those are grounded in New York State SEL benchmarks that are teaching students about self-awareness, self-regulation, that control that we were just talking about in terms of cell phones. So they're getting those lessons through advisory program. In the health curriculum, they're also embedded in those curriculum as well. You also have the No Place for Hate that's happening in the schools too, in that programming. Facing History in Ourselves, where the middle school students are practicing the critical conversations, communities of care, so they're scaffolding those lessons that they learned in the elementary level. We continue to then build upon those lessons as the students get into high school, and we release more of that responsibility to them and begin to again elevate that level of conversation. So where at the high school you might have a program like a Breaking Borders now, where students are going outside of the high school and having these high-level conversations with districts around Long Island, and they're being able to have conversations about their differences, but yet their similarities, and they're connecting over their similarities. So we internally want to face that into the work that's going on. And again, you see that the book days up there, and the iftar that was recently hosted by the Muslim Student Association. And on a quick side of that, you know, this is an area where we want our students really in our curriculum to help them feel comfortable in diverse spaces. That's always what we're trying to do. We want them to be comfortable in a diverse space. And that's a difficult thing even for adults sometimes. And I'll give you a personal anecdote that typically every year around Yom Kippur, somebody's wishing me a happy Yom Kippur. And if you're familiar with the holiday, it's not really a happy holiday. But yet the people who are wishing me a happy Yom Kippur, they're doing that with really good intent. They mean well, they're expressing that, I don't get offended by that, but they also are probably a little bit fearful of asking the question in fear of feeling like they might offend. And I think, you know, and I can speak for myself, where I feel like I've been in those situations myself as well. And of course, you know, as we have life experiences, we get better and better at those things. But even attending and having the honor actually of attending iftar that was hosted by the Muslim Student Association, walking into the event, it was the first iftar I've attended. And I would tell you, walking in there, you know, at first, you don't want to offend. That's the first thing you're thinking of. You want to be respectful and you want to participate. And it took a little while for me to understand what the greeting was, and it was in a conversation actually with a former student who happened to be there, where I felt comfortable enough to ask and be courageous enough to ask the question, what's the appropriate greeting, you know, for iftar? I understood that it was a celebration, but what is it that you say? We want our students to be there, and we want to equip them with the skills and the confidence to do that. So that's what we're going forward, and the recommendations now that, you know, would come out. So I'll get to that in a minute. Let me back up and go into social media just to follow the slide for a minute. So the social media piece, as we all know, and was just touched upon with the cell phones, it is an increasing risk for our students. Students are younger and younger as they engage with social media. We have been for a very long time working through our library systems primarily to provide lessons in digital citizenship and online safety early on, again, age appropriate. As the students get older, we begin to infuse lessons of digital literacy, fluency, media fluency. Again, those are coming through health and wellness and library, so we're beginning to see a theme of where these things are currently sort of existing. We do partner with some outside organizations on some of this curriculum. Common Sense Media is a place that we tend to use through our library system. And most recently, we just sent a team of LMSs to SUNY Stony Brook School of Journalism and News Literacy, where they went to a workshop, a 3-day workshop, on the principles of news analysis and news awareness and engagement. And again, it's professionally developing a group of people who become experts in the interrogation of the media. And so it's really important that we as adults understand what's happening in front of us. We all are on our cell phones. We all have social media. Sometimes our algorithms present something on our phones that's shocking to us. And some of us will then try to change our algorithm by clicking on other things to make sure certain things don't show up again. But do our youngest students, you know, do our students understand that? Do they understand that algorithm, they're the data inputters to that algorithm, right? But they're also, that's what's right in front of them. And those sound bites coming in front of them, that's what they're seeing as the world. And slowly that's creating the world around them, right? And so what we have to equip them with is the ability to first understand how those systems kind of work, and then how they control that through that critical analysis and through that interrogation of that kind of media. When we took a group this year to the Fighting Hate in Social Media and Gaming Conference, it was quite interesting. They had a keynote speaker there. He was the head developer for the game Fortnite. So if you know the game Fortnite, it's a fairly popular game. And he talked about how the game setting is in World War II, Germany. It's a World War II setting. He decided a few years back to code in a Holocaust museum into the game. And when he was asked about why he would do such a thing, he said because it was not represented historically accurately in the game. And his view is that the game is a learning opportunity for kids. What he understands is that he's got students in the game all right? And we could talk about the game separately, but from his perspective, it was an opportunity and a touch point for them to be exposed to something other and understand it in their world, which brought up the other conversation of how students sometimes will have a different persona online than they do in real life. And one of the pieces of information that the students were able to gain out of this particular conference, which was quite shocking and really was a jump-off point for a lot of great conversation, was the idea that the research was showing that, in this particular study, that female students, female game players, had a higher level of tolerance for harassment in the online gaming world than they do in the real life. So when kids get on to Discourse and all of these different apps where they're, acting differently towards each other, apparently there's a higher tolerance for harassment there. So it just shows us that there's work to be done, in and around the social media piece of it, in addition to what we're already doing. So that brings us to sort of what the recommendations and the goals now, and what we'll be looking to do moving forward, to help us accomplish some of this stuff. So we'll take a step back, go back to the cultural competency piece. This is where we really need to elevate the student voice. And that takes us even back to the student experience. It is about their voice and us understanding their voice. We can do that through a systematic curriculum evaluation. We can systematically look at our curriculum. We can find areas where there's redundancies across the curriculum that would provide us avenues where we can now begin to do things a little bit differently and grow in those areas. And making sure that we're providing opportunities for students, again, to discover themselves within and around that curriculum, okay? And what we do understand as educators and as a community, our students as individuals, they develop and grow individually, they change, so their needs change. We also know that as a community, our demographics are growing, are changing, and shifting, so we constantly have to be on top of that and making sure that our curriculum is doing that. So we want to make sure we're fostering the skills that we've been talking about, those conversation skills, those ability to be, and it's a great term, constructively curious, right? We want them to be constructively curious. They have that confidence, as we were talking about, going into diverse settings and feeling confident to ask the questions, coming from a good place, coming from a place of understanding and appreciation. And then for social media, we're going to continue to foster that idea of deep critical analysis, and to make sure that students understand that what they're looking at, and have a strong foundation of media literacy, fluency, that when they're looking at these things and they're put in front of them, they can understand what the impact is going to have, not only themselves, but on their society around them. Okay, on to recruitment.
Our faculty and staff, they serve as the levers for the great work in our district. They're at the forefront. And so therefore, it's critical that we recruit, hire, and train well. We subscribe to a belief that all students benefit from a diverse and heterogeneous faculty, just as they benefit from a diverse and heterogeneous student population. We approach recruitment and hiring with a paradigm that talent is equally and proportionally distributed across the population, and therefore it's critical that we reach and attract a large, diverse talent pool. Our hiring over the last 10 years has resulted in more diversity among our staff. However, there's clearly more work to be done. So some of our existing practices, we actively recruit and hire highly qualified staff through various strategies. So we have a diverse recruitment team. Ms. Aisha Morgenstern, who's behind me in the back, has worked with me as in the HR office as another administrator as part of that hiring team. We use online hiring platforms such as Indeed and LinkedIn to try to get our posts out there to various candidates. We also partner with affinity groups and educational institutions, universities, teacher education programs that serve diverse student populations and large student populations. The district also provides professional training on a range of topics, and some of those topics include unconscious bias, addressing student discipline or misconduct, cultivating belonging, restorative practices. The task force implementation goals, some of what we've looked at is to continue to examine and refine our district's recruitment and hiring process, continue to provide and enhance our efforts to address unconscious bias among among our staff and faculty through professional training. Also, orient new faculty to the Syosset way. So what does that mean? So part of our values in Syosset is that we have a deep commitment to fostering a welcoming and affirming environment for all students, that we are a faculty in a district that adheres to the highest standards and levels of professionalism, and that we also want to ensure a sense of belonging for our students and faculty and community and families, in addition to our faculty and staff. And so part of that is modeling through our recruitment and hiring process, the high level of professionalism. Everything from the first phone call that they get from me or an administrator inviting them in for a screening interview, through the interview process often initially conducted at the building level, up to the cabinet level, superintendent interview, and so on. And so part of that is modeling and orienting through that process the Syosset way, in addition to, upon being hired through the new teacher orientation program, our mentor coordinators, and then obviously with the continued support of the evaluators in our administration and faculty and supportive faculty and staff, that there is an orientation in terms of making sure that we're modeling our values and projecting those values. Lastly, we also want to ensure that there's an evaluation process that's robust, and that our faculty and members of our community are held accountable. And so part of that is proactively evaluating, addressing any faculty and staff who don't perform to those standards in the Syosset way.
I think that it's pretty safe to say that in order for our school communities to be successful, there needs to be community partnership, right? There needs to be a level of parental involvement, and that's how we uphold and promote a warm, welcoming, and affirming environment. That's how we honor our richly diverse community. So some of the existing practices that we have embodied are our year-round religious and cultural days of observance, district-wide, our PTSA multicultural lunch and expos for students and faculty. This is often a culminating event after a week-long recognition of diverse cultures. It's student and teacher collaboration. A lot of the times during the week, our advisory committees are having discussions about diverse cultures. We're also highlighting diverse cultures through our PA announcements, giving more information and feedback, which then goes back to the classroom and sometimes in our ELA and our social studies lessons. One of the beautiful things about the Multicultural Expo is that it is an opportunity for our families and our students and our faculty to share in what makes us different while embracing what also makes us the same. And I think that being able to look at our sameness through that lens of shared experience and shared enjoyment is how we appreciate the differences that some of us have based off of our cultures. In addition, the PTA Cultural Unity Committee has been recognized with the Jan Harp Domin Award. This award recognizes PTAs that best demonstrate outstanding achievements in the areas of diversity and inclusion, as well as making efforts to end discriminatory practices. Our PTSA is part of our curriculum committee, so they're a voice in terms of how our children are educated. Our district documents are translated from English into Spanish, Mandarin, Korean, and Japanese, so recognizing and partnering with our families that are now a part of this diverse, rich culture. And it's promoting better communication with our families. Finally, our creation of an inclusive calendar. Syosset was the first district to add the additional holidays of Diwali, Lunar New Year, Eid al-Fitr, and Eid al-Adha. So what does that all mean? The question becomes, how do we expand upon our current initiatives and increase parental and community involvement? So some of the recommendations from the task force, which included our PTA and community representatives, were to partner with the PTA to continue to create initiatives around building family togetherness. So one of our ideas was to have a quarterly community newsletter to talk about culture, to talk about a variety of different things that may be affecting our school community. It's another way for the community to have a voice and for there to be togetherness and collaboration about that voice and that shared need for knowledge. We also talked about creating a district-wide cookbook around food, calling it the Taste of Syosset, another way for us to appreciate differences while enjoying the same thing, which many cultures, their culture and their pride is around food. I can say that for myself, and I'm pretty sure some of you may share that same experience. Another wonderful thing that we talked about was developing more parent workshops on topics such as understanding DASA. A lot of our parents don't have a true understanding of what that is. Understanding cultural engagement, cultural competency, what is cultural awareness, how to avoid identity-based hate, how to talk to your kids about identity-based hate, whether they're the victims or whether they're the perpetrators. And having those conversations at home are what's so important so that we're ensuring that our children get the same messaging. Creating orientation for families, entering the district to teach about the Syosset culture of care, and that can also be something that is roped into our parent workshops. We also want our parents to be able to inform some of those conversations. So getting some data collection on what are some of the topics that parents need support in. For example, here in Southwoods, myself along with one of our other guidance counselors, Ms. Goodman, we do a parent book walk. And we purchase a book, and we read the book for the parents, and then we kind of just create, you know, a PowerPoint, and we have an open discussion. So some of the books that we've read were The 5 Love Languages of Children. So how to parent your child based on their particular love language. Another was The Whole Brain Child. So understanding how tantrums kind of like come out even in adolescence, and how to support your child, giving them love, but at the same time giving them discipline in order to help them to emotionally regulate. So having these various opportunities for parents to be informed and to inform us as to some of the things that they're struggling with so that we can have a true partnership in how we support our growing youth. And by doing so, we're promoting and publicizing and reinforcing our school district's inclusivity goals, which is a part of our brand of Syosset having a culture of care.
To guide the work of this implementation plan, the idea would be to assemble a steering committee made up of various central office administration, building level administration, teacher and support staff leadership, and then report back to you, the board, with some frequency, likely on a quarterly basis. And so that is our implementation plan, and we're open to your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. This is definitely very, very informative, and also a lot of work that went behind the scene to come up with all these different implementations, and so I do appreciate that. And then are there any questions from the board for, okay, Ms. Abramson?
Thank you guys again. It clearly put in a lot of time and effort, and I really appreciate all of your hard work, so thank you very much. And I guess I have a question and a comment, and the comment was regarding the student affinity groups, I think, and getting community through that. I just think that kids teaching kids, especially about holidays and building community and their culture and things like that, that's an opportunity. I think that building upon that, or asking the affinity groups to or giving them the opportunity to teach about a holiday, a food, or something, giving them time in the lobby, whatever it is, so that they can teach their fellow students will help build the community. It's just something they can bond over. So just an idea to throw out there. And my question was about the cell phone uses in schools, and without any opinion of my own, I've been reading a lot about cell phone use and the implications of it, especially in secondary schools, and a lot of schools have actually taken it totally out of the day. So I just wanted to see if there were, out of curiosity, why that was not the recommendation versus off and away during the day and at lunch. So just curious as to the thoughts behind that.
So the off and away during the day is the current and existing practice. That is something that we did discuss, and we need parent buy-in for that. We need parent buy-in in terms of, you know, parents feeling comfortable with that. Some parents are completely fine and on board, because some of our parental stakeholders that are part of the Anti-Bias Task Force Committee, they brought it to our attention. And we are in support of that idea, because we do feel that the research is indicative of the fact that it can be very damaging. But there are some parents, obviously, that have fears, right? We're living in a time and in a world where gun violence is real. And, you know, our parents want to have access to their children very quickly. And we do have children who feel that they need to contact their parents. And with that being said, there has to be that partnership between the community and the school and being able to follow through on that. Because if we make this mandate, the parents are still sending their children in with with devices, then we're at another crossroad now, because now, if it's a part of the code of conduct, they're violating the code. And then what do we do? And how are we creating that dynamic? And will that create a rupture in our relationship with our parents and with our school community? So it was a part of the recommendation. The off and away during the day was just our existing practice.
Okay, Mr. Greco.
Mr. Steinberg, you mentioned the data collecting opportunities early on in the student experience section, and one of the bullets was student focus groups. I know you've thought about this, so I'm going to ask it anyway. Any other, I mean, obviously, I think it's a great idea to get data directly from the source and the children. Any other ideas, like surveys, that you've thought through, whether you'll utilize them?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So there's been thought through this. The task force did bring up the idea of surveys. That is in discussion. What was an interesting point that we're looking at is the transition years and speaking to students as they're moving from the elementary, so 5th grade to 6th grade. What has the elementary experience been like for the 5th grader, right? So they'll look back and understand what that is. Do that again in the 8th grade. What has the middle school experience been like? And then our graduating seniors, what has not only your high school experience been like, but what has your entire experience been like, you know, here at Syosset? And we really, you know, the task force believes that that data would be really powerful as well in helping to inform some of the changes we're going to need to see.
Dr. Park?
Thank you so much for the presentation and all the work that you have done. I love everything you said, and I'm very encouraged to see us going forward in the right direction. I have many questions. The first, in student experience, we have active, proactive students who's going full force ahead, and they're wonderful. But at the same time, I think it's important for all of our students to learn. Even if they don't participate in creating curriculum and so forth, all of our students have to learn, because if one of the students do something wrong, then all of us are affected by it. So, in getting everyone 100%, it sounds impossible, but I think that's an important goal for us to head forward. You have a comment on that one?
Yes, I agree, and I think we all agree with that, that it's very important that all of our students, 100% of our students, are having this experience, that we talk about the Syosset brand, and we talk about pride, and we talk about what are the skills that we want all students to have, right? We want them all to have a wonderful experience. We want every student to come into our buildings, feel great, but also learn, right? So there's the opportunity where we look at the curriculum and we say, okay, where do we put these lessons in the curriculum that every student's going to have access to it? So it's not just a student taking an elective course or happen to be in a club or happen to be at an event, right? That it's very intentional on our part. So when we talked in the presentation about doing the evaluation of curriculum, it's really to look at that and say, where's that opportunity that you're talking about? That every single one of our students will have the opportunity to get these lessons, to learn these skills, to have a wonderful experience.
Yeah, thank you. And previously we talked about student survey, and I think that's going to be almost like a grade that we receive as a school district. That will be the final, ultimate evaluation of all of our effort.
Mm-hmm.
And having that evaluation, I don't know how often we have to do it, but I think that's pretty important for us to have. And I agree with you 100% on what is it called? What did you call it? Constructive curiosity towards other culture, and teaching our students how to ask, and what you said, how do I greet? What is the proper way to greet this holiday? I think that is a technical skill that all of our students need to learn, so that they don't feel that they're afraid to insult anyone or shy away from this situation, but they are given the tool to ask, okay, in this situation, you don't have to shy away, you don't know the culture, this is what you say, so that you can understand this culture better. I think that's very, very important. And at the same time, I think it's important for all of us to have the ability to recognize our own bias. Even if we are very progressive and we feel like, yeah, I'm very inclusive, we're still going to have those bias that we don't even recognize. And at the same time, teaching our children to, instead of trying to defend it or justify it, recognize it. I think it's a tool, ability to recognize, oh, I thought it this way. This is a bias that I have. And self-recognizing, and if I am faced with somebody else who recognizes and tells me, how do I apologize right away without feeling like, okay, I did something terrible. Yeah. It's actual literal terms. Okay, in that situation, this is what you say, and admit it, apologize, rather than trying to hide or justify it, so that you can go to bridge that kind of awkwardness and go forward, so that you can learn more. I guess that's more of a comment than a question. But I do have a question. In restorative practices, we emphasize restorative practices a lot. How do we come to give closure for both people who did wrong, perpetrator, and somebody who
That's a really
been victimized?
excellent question, because in my experience, that often falls on our mental health support staff. So myself, school social worker, our guidance counselors, and many times our building level, grade level assistant principals, and sometimes the principal is also involved in these conversations. So I'm not talking about mediation between the victim and the perpetrator, because in many instances, that's not appropriate, right? Our victim may be re-victimized, and that's not something that we would want. But in those instances where we're having these conversations about rupture and repair, how do we move from the rupture towards the repair and establishing the relationship effectively through our community expectations, through reintroduction and rehearsal of the code of conduct? Those conversations are happening whenever there is an instance of harassment, bullying, even at the smallest degree. So those are conversations that we're having with our teachers in our professional development. Those are conversations that we're having one-on-one with students where there are issues of bullying, harassment, things of that nature. And we often talk to the individuals separately, ensuring that the victim understands that what happened in that instance is never okay. In my experience, and I'll share this, very candidly, some of our students who have experienced harassment, it isn't the first time. And one of the reasons why it isn't the first time is because they don't want to make a big to-do. They don't want to get the other child in trouble, because sometimes it's their friend. And when it's their friend, they prioritize that relationship, which is not uncommon at the adolescent age and even in the elementary age. They're prioritizing maintaining that relationship at the expense of themselves. So a part of our job as mental health professionals is to remind them that it is okay to prioritize themselves in those moments, that they should stand up and say something, and that they have adults in the building who will listen to them, who will respond to them, and who will work actively to ensure that that doesn't happen again. Following that conversation, there is a call to the parent. And the same thing happens with the perpetrator, because we often look at, well, what happened is definitely a negative impact on the victim, but it also has a negative impact on the perpetrator. When you're engaging in that type of behavior, whether it is insultive, assaultive, there's always something underlying behind it. So we utilize a trauma-informed approach to understand that many times the perpetrator has also experienced some form of trauma, because hurt people tend to hurt people. And that is why we have those conversations in not just one conversation. Let me also add that. It's not just one conversation. It's more than one conversation, not to beat a dead horse, but to instill in our children the importance of empathy and perspective taking, so that those ruptures don't continue to happen, but so that they can get to a place of repair.
Can we also extend that to the families too? Because when our children are hurt, it's not just the children that's hurt. It's the families. Parents are hurt even more. And having that closure for the parents is also very important. And I think that's one of the things that our community gets upset, because their experience of what happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, is still very, very raw.
Yes, and I definitely agree with you. I can only speak for my personal experience when I follow up with families. I'm a parent too. My stepdaughter is going to be 25, and my daughter is going to be 19 on Monday. So I absolutely understand what that feels like when your children are hurting and when you hurt for your children, right? So when I do speak to parents, I don't come only from the lens of a psychologist. I come from the lens of a parent, and I think I can speak for my colleagues, that many of them come from that same place of wanting not only for our parents to understand that we are actively taking care of their children physically, academically, and emotionally, but we are there for them as well, and we want them to understand that it's painful when you see that your child is hurting or has been a victim of some type of harassment, but that we are open to having those conversations. We're also open to that feedback, because sometimes parents just want to be heard in that moment, and we make space for that. We hold space for parents with that as well.
One last question. For the recruitment, we have this wonderful process, and we are improving a lot. And just wondering, who is evaluating our hiring process? Because I'm sure, even though it's great, that it could improve more. Is there some way that we are evaluating our own hiring process to improve, make improvement?
Yeah, I would say that it's holistic in the sense that I think we're always in a state of evaluating our hiring process, reflecting on when issues do come up. What was the hiring process for that particular staff member, as an example? Were references checked? Who are those references? And how can we continue to do better? So I think, during when we're in the thick of the process, we reflect on what types of questions we're asking. Who are we pulling from the candidate pool, based on our effort to put our postings out there, and who's applying for the positions. So we're in the thick of the hiring process now for many positions, and so we're in a constant reflection. Once our faculty and staff are hired, and then they're evaluated, and then we sit with our administration at all levels and have a discussion on current probationary faculty members and staff. We're reflecting on sort of their progress and evaluating how they were brought into the institution, whether they were provided with the necessary supports to be successful in the district. So I would say that it isn't, and I think that's part of our reflection too, is how can we continue to assess our process at all stages. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, I have just one quick comment and one recommendation. The comment is that it is great that we had Professor Lowe that came to our district to speak with the community, and not just during the day to the students, and then the evening with the community. And I just want to mention that last year, we also have Elaine Chow, the former Secretary of Labor, who came to speak with the students, and that was a great turnout. So, I mean, as a parent, this is a great opportunity both for the students and for the community. So that's the comment, and the recommendation is that I see that we are trying to, the community partnership of trying to develop parent workshops on topics such as understanding DASA, culture engagement, and I imagine student code of conduct too. it would be great that with the collaboration with the different affinity groups to use bilingual smaller workshops to reach the broader community. I think that's going to be very, very beneficial because I do see a disconnect sometimes in these workshops because of the language barrier. So if that can be implemented, I think it's gonna be really, really wonderful in reaching to the parents that who normally wouldn't come to these workshops. So that's just my recommendation. I don't know if there are any more questions from the board. Mr. Rotolo?
Thank you. Wonderful presentation. Thank you, guys. I know there was a lot of work to put in there. It's very, very specific, very detailed. And I'd also like to thank the Anti-Bias Committee who put in all this work to make the recommendations. And maybe we can go forward, not call it Be Anti-Anything. One of my comments on the steering committee, is this a permanent committee?
They're all silent, waiting for me to answer. What I envision is we have a series of recommendations. We want to get those jump-started. If they were recommendations that could be accomplished instantly, it wouldn't be much of a plan. So what I anticipate will happen is we'll come back to you with some reports over the course of the next year, where we are with the implementation, how it's going, whether we've hit any impediments or roadblocks, and what we see as the next steps. It may be a year or two for all of these. None of these recommendations are going to be put off, but it may be a year or two before we say, wow, this has been completely woven into the fabric of who we are as a district. So at that point, we'll reevaluate where we are, what needs we still have, what changes you as a board may recommend for us to consider, and we may approach that work a little bit differently. And there may be other members of the staff and leadership team that want to be involved in that process. I know our little working group, the conversations that we've had have been really insightful and engaging and probing. And I've learned from just that conversation that we've been having. I think other members of the district leadership team would also benefit from being a part of that. So we may want to include different voices or rotate through more people. But in the short term, I envision the working group advising us. As we said on the previous slide, we need buy-in from our bargaining units, our faculty, our STA membership, the leaders, our SPA, our civil servants, because they are also the face of Syosset. They are often who parents are interacting with. They are certainly the people who are interacting with our PTA as they set up and break down rooms. So it's important that we have their buy-in as well and their understanding of our priorities. So in the short term, this is what it looks like. Over the course of the longer term, you'll have reports from us on how things are going, and we'll all have a sense of whether we need to recalibrate.
Ms. Dostrick.
Sure, I was happy to go at the end. Lisa, if you had something, you can go. Okay. So Dr. Rogers, I don't have questions. I sort of have sort of my takeaway from maybe emphasizing some strategic priorities from where I sit as a board member. First, I really think we want to emphasize ease of access for these resources that we're talking about for parents. So when it comes to accessing DASA files on the website, or accessing personnel, or accessing workshops, having them recorded, having them translated, having them stored, having them easy to find, having the student handbook, the code of conduct, easy to locate, easy to search, easy to sort through, easy to understand. The ease of access and the ability of folks in the learning community to get to them whenever they want, whether or not they're available at the time, I think is a high priority from my point of view in terms of how we should be thinking about implementing some of these recommendations. Second, we heard a lot about social media. I remember reading an interview with the CEO of Netflix, who once talked about, they were asking him what his chief competitor was. Was it Disney? Was it Amazon? His answer was, no, it's sleep. We're fighting to keep people awake. That's what we're up against in terms of the pernicious ability of social media to pervade young people's minds, phones, bodies, souls, etc. If we think we're doing enough to combat the effects of social media, we should double it, and then we should probably double it again. Because what we're up against is enormous, and so from my point of view, from a strategic priority, that's something we cannot emphasize enough. Number 3, the reporting mechanism for data. So we talked, there was some conversation about surveys, there were some conversations about student information. Having that collected and then on a regular basis keeping us updated on some of those results, as Shani pointed out, that's our report card, I think it's crucial. I don't think we can do our job well if we don't know the results in a regular fashion. And 4th and last, I noticed with interest in the presentation, a couple of times we referred to the Syosset way, the Syosset brand, the things we're trying to make in the district. So one thing that I noticed was interestingly absent from the presentation was the role of the board in communicating those values. So the organization is going to succeed at unifying, creating less discord, creating more unity, expressing those shared values, the things that we're trying to create, the things that we're trying to make in terms of the output of our students, I think is absolutely important for us to repeat relentlessly. I was taking notes and I had some ideas when I knew that we were talking about some of these things. So some of the attributes of students that I think we're trying to create, and I would love the board's input additionally, open-mindedness and curiosity. So interest, yeah, I heard reference to interest in other people's opinions, especially if they're different. Approaching people in conversations as a chance to learn something new. Mental flexibility, persistence, risk-taking, willingness to try new things. Compassion, critical thinking and debate, the ability to refine what comes into our brain before it comes out of our mouth. The ability to discuss things, to disagree without being disagreeable. Creativity and collaboration. I think if we can get together the list of the values, attributes, and skills that we're trying to create among our students, and we can encapsulate those as value statements and repeat them up and down the organization, particularly at the top, I think we're going to have much more success than if we try to do this piecemeal. So those are really the 4 points I'd emphasize in terms of what I'm hearing tonight, and hope you can, the rest of the board has some other thoughts.
Ms. Koshia.
Just to respond to what you just said, because it's fresh in my mind, what you said about the skills for the students, I think you make excellent points. I could only jot down 7 of them. I know you said more than that, but I think that's an excellent point, because if we start that throughout K to 12, it's a lot of years to foster these types of skills that are so important for our kids. But I'd like to have more of a conversation on what this was all about tonight, because for tonight, me personally, hearing the presentation, thank you guys for your hard work and everybody that was behind the scenes. Me personally, hearing this tonight, hearing from all the board members, thinking about these things myself, I'd like to come back to this and discuss it more and be able to ask more questions. I just need to process it a little bit more and dissect like what we heard tonight. But I just have a quick question and then just a comment. My question is, as far as student feedback, I think it's great the 5th, 8th, and 12th having those benchmarks, as you know, they're great benchmarks to get answers from these kids on what their experiences were like for the last 5 years, 3 years, 4 years. Would it be possible, and I know it's the end of May, would it be possible to get any type of feedback this year, within the next month, from at least those 3 grade levels, even if it's just very basic, just to have something like jumping board to kind of start the process with. I know it's asking a lot, but just something. It won't be a perfected method of getting information, but just something. So that's my question for you.
So I'm not going to commit to an answer to that, only because just as you want to sort of process the information, I think that's something we would have to just process in terms of what that might look like, what types of questions we would be asking the students that would be appropriate at each of those levels so that we're actually getting the information that's going to be of some value to us. So, I mean, could we go out and just ask the do that? So it's not a no, it's not a yes, it's let us think about that and see if that in the next few weeks, that it doesn't interfere with end of the year exams and things along that line, could we get something done? But we'll definitely take a look at it.
So I like that answer even more than yes or no, because I know what I'm asking of you. So my other part to that is, if you talk about it and after you brainstorm, you're like, you know what, it's just not possible with everything you just mentioned. Would it be possible, I know we're going to lose the 12th graders in the end of June, but would it be possible maybe in September to come to the 11th now going into 12th grade, these kids that are moving up, just to start the beginning of the year, if it's not feasible in the next 4 weeks, maybe some conversations over the summer and come back in the fall with something, because I feel like the reason why I'm saying this is because I feel like having the student feedback is going to drive all these different components of what you're speaking about tonight, just having something to start to work with. So I think maybe that's more feasible.
I agree.
That's fair enough. And I just want to make a general comment, because as far as curriculum is concerned, one of the main things, and Jack touched upon it, and I think you said disagree without being disagreeable. Is that what you said? I think that's a great point, and I think one of the big factors curriculum-wise, and this is K to 12, for when you look at the big picture, is being able to be, and I believe, Mrs. Steinberg, you said having conversation skills, the ability to be in whatever class it is, health, social studies, English, wherever you are, and be able to hear somebody else's opinion, and even though it's not your own opinion, or maybe you can understand why they would have that opinion, to be able to ask the questions, well, okay, I don't necessarily agree with you, but why do you feel that way? And it doesn't mean I'm going to change my opinion. It just means I'm going to understand you better. And it may have an effect on how I feel about something, but I think going forward, that is an incredibly important skill for our kids to have. And I think as adults, it's very difficult too. It's not just a kid thing, so to speak. As adults, it's hard to listen to other adults and say, no, that's not right. Or, you want people sometimes to think the way you think. However, when you said that, just triggered something in my mind, because if we can start that at a very young age and go through K to 12, that to me is one of the most important skills to have, because as an adult, if we could have a world of adults that can kind of agree to disagree and learn how to get along together, we've hit the nail on the head, so to speak.
And just to add a comment to that, the advantage we have is that we have a strong foundation of that already happening from which we can build. So that we can look at what we're doing currently, right, and find those areas from which to build that, make it more ubiquitous of a lesson throughout the K through 12 spectrum. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mr. Greco.
Thank you again. And like Mr. Ostrich had, I have a lot of comments as well, and what I'll do is I'll echo what he said, because I agree with all of them, especially number 2 related to social media. But his fourth point, where he talked about values and sort of this Syosset brand concept, I do have a question. And like I said, I want to limit to questions and not comments. You talked about an orientation for new families and teaching about a Syosset culture of care. Could you describe what you mean by that, and whether it's sort of in line with what Mr. Ostrich was saying regarding our Syosset values?
My apologies. Could you just repeat that?
Under the implementation goals, under community partnership, you talked about an orientation for new families and you talked about teaching a Syosset culture of care. I mean, I put it in quotes, it's not in quotes right now. I was wondering if that was in line with what I think Mr. Ostrick was getting at, which was sort of the Syosset joint values that we all share.
Yes, I think that that's important, that we help families that are coming into our district understand where we stand when it comes to accepting diversity, when it comes to inclusivity. And I think that it's really important that sometimes we understand that we need to be able to be okay with being uncomfortable. We need to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. We need to get to a place where we can have conversations that aren't easy, but still remain respectful. So to Mr. Ostrick's point, disagreeing without being disagreeable. And I think that having those conversations, and also from a standpoint of some of our families are coming in from other cultures, they don't speak English, that's not their first language, so providing them with cultural brokers, providing them with other family members that can also be able to support them in understanding. So almost like a mentorship for some of our families. That would also be super helpful so that they feel like they belong and that they have someone that they can connect with. Not just at the building level, but in the community as well.
Okay, all right. Are there any more questions from the board? All right, thank you so much again for all your work and effort into putting together this presentation. And then we look forward to an update in a couple of months. Thank you.
I'd just like to comment as well. So first of all, thank you to the board for your conversation and your reflection on the presentation. Thank you to the working group for all the work that you put into this presentation and for spending so much time with me. I apologize for your having to do that. I want to also make a couple of points. Ultimately, this does all boil down to the student experience, because in the end, we're an institution that provides an experience for students around a lot of different dimensions, but that experience has to be the best that it can possibly be. And so at the core, students need to feel like they belong. They need to feel like they belong in who they are as part of their fundamental identity. They need to feel like they belong in that the adults around them care about them. They need to feel like they belong in that this is a community that sees and appreciates what they bring to the community, whether that's their heritage or their intellect. We need to have an experience where students feel like they belong. Part of belonging is also feeling safe. So we need for students to feel safe in our district. Part of making students feel safe is having rules that are transparent and confident that the district will enforce those rules. I would hope in my wildest dreams that no student would ever break rules, but I know that's not realistic. So we're going to have effective systems for intervening when that happens. I like Ms. Calvert-Foster's framing of rupture and repair. So when rupture occurs, repair has to follow it. I like very much, Mr. Ostrick, your portrait of a graduate, the skills and affect that we would hope our graduates would have. And I think coming on the heels of Professor Lowe's conversation last week, where his point essentially is that artificial intelligence has made many of the academic skills that we prize and are very good at delivering less important than the skills of that are hard to replicate with artificial intelligence, and those have become more important just as tools of success in society, but they're equally important for their own intrinsic value. So I think for both of those reasons, they're a good target for us to aim at and think about what we want our students to have. So especially in this community, because it is so diverse, that cultural competence piece, I think, is critically important for our students to be able to have. I take and share everyone's point on social media, and in our working group conversations, getting deeper into the research on how social media is actually affecting brain development in young adolescents, how it is enhancing the neural pathways of addiction, was startling and concerning. And so I think we have to be attentive to that. I think we need to do some due diligence in educating our parent community about what the research is suggesting. And I think we also have an obligation to help our young people interrogate what they're being told on social media as closely as we ask them to interrogate the news. Because there's opportunity for bias and misrepresentation and inaccuracy in any source of media, and students need to have a better appreciation for that. I do meet with groups of students, I call them my student cabinet, and I'm startled every year when I ask this question. Students are younger and younger and younger, and now there are elementary students that tell me not only do they have cell phones, but they have social media accounts. Hard for me to imagine as a 4th or a 5th grader navigating through that space and doing it thoughtfully, doing it safely. Last point, we create all of these things through the staff that we hire and support. And so all of these goals that we want to achieve will only be achieved through the tool that we have, and the tool that we have are the people we have. So I think for us to hire well is critically important, and for us to support the people that we have is also critically important. And I think we're more attentive to this now than we have ever been in my 10 years here, and we've been attentive to this, and I think the excellence of our staff speaks to how attentive we've been, but I see the opportunity for us to grow even more. And then I'll just make the one last point. This term brand came from the external task force that was put together. And I will just reflect that before the events of the last year, when folks external to Syosset would ask me, what's Syosset like? What's it all about? What do you see as your priorities? I proudly would say we're a super diverse community. We have a parent and building community that really likes to celebrate that diversity in really rich ways. And the leadership, the Board of Education of the community has done some really tangible things to recognize the population that is here, from changing the calendar to have more inclusive calendar, but to all kinds of things large and small. So I think we're a district that is proud of how hard we've worked to both recognize and make the diverse populations in our district feel as though everyone belongs. And I do think that that is our brand. I do think that we've lost that a little bit, and I think it's incumbent upon us, if that is who we are and who we want still to be, to take every opportunity, as Mr. Ostrick said, to emphasize that this is a value that we have, and that value has not changed. We have work to do in order to make sure that we're expressing that value in the best way possible, but I certainly don't feel that that value has changed. I just feel that that value needs to shine through some of the events that have impeded it from being seen. So this is where I'll speak for the administrative staff. This is work we want to do. This is work I know we all believe in. I know this is work that is exciting and generative, and I look forward to having students who are even more open-minded and curious and have mental flexibility and are persistent, are risk takers and know what to do when they fail with those risks, who are critical thinkers. I wrote down executive function because we want students to have the metacognition to understand what's going on inside their own heads when they feel emotions take over, when they feel themselves slipping into stereotype or a bias or something like that. So these are wonderful skills to build into kids, and we're the right institution to do it, and I think we're excited about doing this work.
Yep, it's definitely very exciting, and thanks again for the anti-bias task force to come up with the recommendations, and the central administration and the team to come up with the implementations. And I'm just as excited to see the process of this. Thanks again. Okay, all right. Moving on to next, that's going to be the Board of Ed goals. And then before we start the discussion, Dr. Rogers has a brief presentation, so we'll do that first. Thank you.
Thank you. So the board did some work in an online survey to try and assess goals and priorities for the district. We operate, of course, with goals. We have academic goals, we have fiscal goals, et cetera. Those goals have come out of the conversations that I have with the board every month, and the board makes their priorities known, and I shape those into goals. But a lot of school districts will have boards formally adopt goals, so that just as the board has formally adopted a mission and vision statement for the school district, this would be a process that would lead you towards ultimately adopting some goals. Those goals would drive internal alignment in the organization because the buildings would organize activities around making sure that they're meeting the board goals. I would certainly structure our administrative work around those goals as well. So we worked with a consultant, a colleague of mine, who took a lot of the feedback that he got from the board and turned it into some draft goals for you to consider. This is his exercise in wordsmithing, but there's certainly no pride of authorship in any of this. The goal is to get words that reflect who you are as a board and what you see this organization becoming over the course of the next several years. For Khan, it doesn't matter how many times you train me, I'm going to do it wrong the first try. So the first goal is an academic goal. Obviously, we're an academic institution. We need to have an academic goal. Our goal has always been maximize the success of our students. But your thoughts have come up with a more comprehensive goal, providing our students and staff with structures and resources to create experiences unique to each individual student. So there's a sense of personalization beyond just excellence, and ensuring that those experiences include an appropriate balance of work and healthy stress. So recognizing that for students to achieve their full potential, they are going to have to strive, but also recognizing that not too much stress is not healthy, and finding the right balance. And then lastly, offering students the ability to discover and exceed their greatest potential. So we think about maximizing student potential sometimes along a single continuum, but often students have skills in multiple domains, and letting them discover where their potential lies or the potential that they want to maximize. So we can certainly, as administration, build some strategic objectives towards that goal. You had suggested things around the curriculum, the classroom environment, how we train our teachers, and obviously trying to remain conscious of costs while doing it. But what I would hope to get from this conversation is whether you feel comfortable with the framing in this goal, whether this is a goal we should build strategic objectives towards, whether there is a different emphasis that needs to be captured here. And I don't know if you want to linger on each one of these goals, or if you want me to run through all of them first and then return to each goal for conversation.
I guess you can finish the entire presentation, and then we'll come back as a board to do the discussion.
So a lot of what we've been talking about tonight is culture, climate, and character. Our students' culture, climate, and character. The goal here is to create safe, inclusive environments. That certainly gets to the conversation that we just had, that allow all students to thrive and successfully face evolving challenges. Your mission statement talks about the board's recognition that our students are living in an evolving environment, and so they're going to have to aim, unfortunately, at a moving target. So some of the suggestions that you had for how to achieve this goal are around fostering compassion. I think I hear some of these words echoed in the conversation that you just had, reflecting on the presentation: collaborative learning, a community-focused mentality, upstanders, not bystanders, and open dialogue that where there's receptivity to other opinions, but at least the ability to disagree agreeably. I know the board is really prioritizes its relationship with the community and its ability to serve the community well. So in the goal, you have communicating effectively with the external community of stakeholders, and certainly effectively must take into account the fact that not everyone communicates in the same way or in the same language. remain focused on creating an inclusive school community where every child feels a sense of value and belonging. That certainly reflects our ideas about the student experience that we just talked about a few moments ago. And we might want to enhance that goal to include not just where every child feels a sense of value and belonging, but perhaps every family feels a sense of value and belonging. Objectives, find ways to actively seek input, be better at how we communicate our plans, the ideas and the rationale behind those plans, and our results in progress. We just had a conversation about how our student body can have differing fundamental identities, but nevertheless be a single community. And we want our students to be able to disagree or to find a sense of unity in affinity groups without having that student body then fragment. And of course, none of this comes for free, so the board has to be attentive as trustees to the physical plant that we're all responsible for maintaining, and of course the budget that finances all of this work, but comes at the expense of the local tax burden. So your goal, providing facilities that are adequate to support an excellent education. I think for me, the contrast of adequate and excellent puts your priorities on the education more than on the buildings, and for our students and experiences for our community members, recognizing that all of this infrastructure is a community asset. And then in terms of some objectives, spaces that are reflective of the quality of the program. We want our students to be proud of the spaces that they learn in. We recognize the importance of being fiscally responsible, ensuring that the persons who are taking advantage of the excellent education in Syosset deserve that excellent education because they live here, and focusing on excellence and nevertheless continuously gathering feedback. So those were the 4 draft goals that came out of the board's exercise, and so look for some reflection. I know Ms. Heffron is prepared to do some typing at speed because I know I won't be able to write and keep up if there are changes that the board would like to make.
All right, thank you so much for this presentation. Again, we did some work, a survey of the board to come up with these 4 areas, and then today we are not adopting anything or voting on anything. It's just going to be a discussion, and we are not going to focus on the wordsmithing part. We're just focusing on the high level. So if anyone has any recommendations or any comments, please feel free. Mr. Greco?
So obviously, the idea of having written and adopted goals is something near and dear to me. And I think it's a great idea in addition to our mission statement and our values. And I guess my concern is a little bit overarching. Obviously these are 4 goals that were put together based on our value statement, which has been previously approved years ago. And I view goals as something that would be more narrow and something that we can discuss on an annual basis, something that we would maybe, approve once and then every June or July or August, go back, tweak them, and adopt them for the coming year. And I don't know if this set of goals does that. And I don't want this to become some kind of a free-for-all where, we all make wordsmithing. I mean, Ms. Chang mentioned we're not doing that tonight. But what I'm thinking is, I'll give you an example. The community goal right now, in my mind, it's 2 goals, right? It's talking about we, which arguably is the board, will communicate effectively with external community of stakeholders. So if I had my way, it would be something along the lines of we're going to communicate effectively with external and internal members of our community and stakeholders. And that would be the board's sort of communication goal. But the second half of that sentence is remain focused on creating an inclusive school community where every child feels a sense of value and belonging. Yes, that's a great goal. That's a community, sort of a school community goal. So I'm getting a little lost in the sense that I feel like we have more work to do to get to the point where we can start to discuss the language and the goals, and I may not know the best way to get there. Mr. McGowan was, excuse me, was Mr. McGowan, right? He was great. He got us from nowhere to this. I just don't know if maybe another chance with him to facilitate this kind of discussion, maybe where we need to go. That's what I would recommend. But, you know, I'm happy to spend the next 6 hours going over each of these and giving you my thoughts. So I guess I'll leave it there.
Okay. I actually like the idea, you know, because we put this together, the survey and then the hours, and then Kevin McGowan, he's absolutely wonderful in getting us to where we are right now. So I don't mind having him back again to work with us as a board, you know, to elaborate on something that we have already, and then just to have more input and more, you know, say wordsmith to come up with the higher goal or the narrow goal that you were talking about. So I don't know how other board members feel about this, to invite him back again. I mean, we'll still continue to discuss this tonight, but to have him back again to work with us. So, okay. Mr. Ostrick?
Sure. So from my point of view, I just want to ask a clarifying question so that I understand. Discussing procedural things and discussing exercises to help us brainstorm and characterizing things in broad ways and training us as a board to think about what goals are or what objectives are, you know, who writes strategic objectives, what the purpose of strategic objectives are, what the purpose of goals are. I'm totally on board with the training aspect and the high-level organization aspect of getting us to the point where I agree with Brian. I think these are a little confused, and I think they're organized by category and not organized by function, which is okay because we organize them according to the values in our mission statement. I guess I just want to make sure I understand that what we would be doing with a facilitator would be the things that I talked about, which is training us about what strategic objectives are, what goals are, how to broadly characterize thoughts, how to bounce ideas and find a framework for us and a process by which we could get to goals. I am much less comfortable with the idea of wordsmithing goals in private. That's not something I'm going to feel super excited about. That's part of our job here in the public and not in the private.
I don't think anyone was thinking we'd be wordsmithing in private, and I also believe McGowan can meet with us in public. The idea that we can meet in a board retreat for the purpose of discussing the process is invaluable because we would have nothing right now without sort of this, I think you called it an online survey. But this, if you look at our current goals now, they are very much a reflection of our value statement and our mission statement. Where I would like to go with this is, regardless of the mechanism we do it, is I'd like to bring him back because I feel like he could get us somewhere in 3 hours instead of 10 hours. And whether it's in, I mean, I guess the question is, would we start with process? Do we still have a process issue, or do we go right to writing? And I do think we still have a process issue. I think some of these goals need to be separated by a facilitator when he sort of digs deeper into it and decides, you know what, Brian's right. These need to be two separate goals. And some goals need to be measurable. Some goals don't need to be measurable. I think every one of these goals needs to be narrowed. That's his job. We can do that. We can do that tonight. But I think another meeting with him will give us the opportunity to do that. And then just the question becomes, if we're going to get into any substantive discussion of the content of the goals, we'll have to do that in public, of course. And I guess conceivably we can do it all in one night. I just don't know what his availability will be. But to answer your question, Jack, yes, of course.
Anyone else?
So with that being said, yes, I think he's an excellent facilitator and would significantly help us process-wise and public-private, correct separations, et cetera. I would think he would keep us productive and moving in short order relative to an alternative which might take longer.
Okay, how does everyone feel about that? Ms. Koshia?
I'm on board too with meeting with him again in board retreat, like you guys were saying. I don't need to repeat it. Just a question for everybody though. We have four different areas: academic, culture, climate, character, community, and operations fiscal. Just because we're going to have the opportunity as individuals to take this home and think about it, write down notes so that for the next time that we meet in public, we have a little bit more to speak about for myself and just for everybody else. Are we okay with those four areas being like the umbrella areas of the goals? Does anybody have suggestions as to different, because I like these four areas personally, but I feel like we might be missing something. I'm not sure what it is. Does anybody have a suggestion to add or what? I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know.
So I believe these came from our vision statement, and I think any goal we adopt will fall within one of the four. I guess what my point was, I think there could be 3 goals under community, or 2 goals under culture, climate, and character. So I think that's what Mr. McGowan would be tasked with, is when he receives feedback from us, whether through another survey or not, he would then understand, which he probably didn't the first time, that we may want more narrow goals, multiple goals fitting within each of these categories. But I think we're all in agreement that these are 4 very good categories, and why, I mean, they're titles. So I would stick to them.
Okay, so keep these 4 as the umbrella, which I'm fine with. That's fine. But you're saying multiple goals could possibly be multiple goals under academic, under community. Okay. Okay. What do you mean, or, God bless you, what do you mean, or none? Go ahead.
So the way I understand goal writing is it's the strategic direction and the prioritization that the board is giving. And at different points in time, the different areas will need higher or lower amount of prioritization. So it could be that right now, I don't know, one of these areas that's outlined in the vision statement doesn't need a current strategic level goal from the board. It's possible, or I think it's unlikely. It could be that certain areas need 3 goals, because that's really where the strategic priority that we want to focus our resources and the administration's attention is. So the point is that these are broad categories that are pulled from our mission and value statement, and then we organize the goals and strategic objectives underneath those categories as a way of basically pointing the rudder for the administration to focus their time, energy, and resources.
And one way the board could do is that we can come back and visit these adopted goals every year, and then to modify those goals, and then to fit, what the current environment is. And so once we adopt it, they're not fixed forever. We'll still come back and revisit, and to make any modifications possible.
So I'm okay with all that, but I don't think, I don't see one category here where I don't think there should be a goal under it. I think all 4 categories are very important. So me personally, I wouldn't want to see one of these categories blank with no goal. I'm okay with adding multiple goals under one of the umbrella categories. I just wouldn't want to see one of these categories without anything. I do agree there are some of these categories that we may need more than others for one year to the next year, but I definitely don't want to see anything blank. I definitely goal under each.
So Dr. Rogers, could you check with Mr. McGowan for dates like within the next 2 weeks and see if he's available? As soon as possible, of course.
I suspect his June looks like my June. So, but I will absolutely try to find out what availability he has. And I know he, in some school districts that he's worked with, he's had administration put together like draft strategic priorities and things like that for the board to react to. So I'll talk with him about some options for how to accelerate this work by taking advantage of a lot of the brain power that exists on my administrative team to give you things to react to so you're not creating stuff out of whole cloth.
And then maybe we can take a field trip to Brighton School District to meet with him. Just kidding. Okay, all right, so, oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Ostrich.
Right. So 2 quick observations. One is that I don't think we're going to be creating anything out of whole cloth because we've already had a retreat about this. So I'm going to take a stab at writing some goals and some strategic objectives, and I'd like to circulate them. In addition, if the administration wants to take some as well, I think that's great. I think we should all probably take a shot at creating, drafting where we think priorities and strategic objectives are. I think it behooves us to be the strategic leadership as much as we can in this particular instance. And the second thing I would say is when it comes to revising goals and revisiting them, I think it's important that when we think about having our goals are multi-year and should extend over long periods of time. And when we're revisiting them, we're revisiting to see a high level if that priority is still the focus of where we should be directing resources. But at the same time, our strategic objectives, which are shorter term, are the things that we're going to be measuring over the course of shorter duration, a year or 2 years. And those are the things I think we can revisit most frequently in the summer, June, July, et cetera. And I am hopeful that when we get these adopted, the presentations that we'll get to the board at regular board meetings will be data-rich and designed to hit the landmarks of the strategic objectives that we have outlined for the goals, so that when we're sitting and receiving information that's rich with data and decision-making opportunities for us, they'll be specifically tailored to those strategic objectives and goals that we've outlined.
Not that I don't like getting emails from you, but if you're going to draft goals, I would recommend sending them directly to Dr. Rogers, copying only Carol, and then he will pass them on to Mr. McGowan, who is clearly a pro, and will know how to digest one board member's goals when coming back to us with a product.
All right, any more questions from the board? Okay, all right. This concludes our second meeting in May, and meeting adjourned. Thank you so much, and see you in 2 weeks.